Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of Introduction to Child and Adolescent Development. I think you find this week's work a little bit more interesting than last week, as there are some components here to do with behaviour and learning that as a TA you can really sink your teeth into and really use to improve your own teaching practices. I hope you enjoyed last week's slide. I'm sure it was a bit dry, but also I hope that you had a moment to take a look through chapter 4. This is chapter 5, the assessment book that you will receive this week. Has questions in it from chapter 4 as well as chapter 5. So make sure you're paying close attention to the work we're going to discuss in class today, as well as this slide, as well as the slides from last week, and chapter 4 and chapter 5 from your text, as this information will be used to complete the questions and activities in your assessment book. With no further ado, let's get underway. Here we'll have a list of learning objectives for this week. Please press pause and take a moment to have a look through those and familiarise yourself with what we'll be covering this week in class. Cognitive development. What is cognitive development? Well, research suggests that cognitive development is the ability to think and learn. It refers to your ability to apply new skills, to achieve developmental milestones, and it's influenced by socio-cultural factors, including the environment, sense of self, and hereditary factors. Language and communication skills begin from an early age and are also well developed by the commencement of school. More complex skills such as reasoning and problem solving are developed in later years. During this process, the physical brain continues to grow and form connections as it reaches maturity in early adulthood. Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development. Vygotsky suggested that cognitive development was a result of inherited genetic factors, that there are lower mental functions as well as higher mental functions. The lower mental functions we learn as skills, and the higher mental functions occur through socialization. Therefore, children are dynamic learners who can adapt to their environment as well as any social situation to improve their learning and skills, and this will have an influence upon their experiences as well as the development of their personality as they continue through childhood into adulthood. Vygotsky also came up with the zone of proximal development theory. What he suggested was that the lower limit, which we discussed in the previous slide, is the lowest level of potential a child could achieve without intervention of an adult. On the other hand, the upper limit refers to how much potential a child could achieve with full support of an adult and through supportive interactions within the community. Language skills help to build and develop knowledge through interactions with adults. Language is required for the thought process, which is an important aspect of Paget's theory of cognitive development. Focus on the development of thinking, reasoning, memory, and logic. Paget believed that children do not think the same way as adults. Paget's theory differed from Vygotsky's in that Paget believed a child's learning to be based upon independent learning and use of their senses to synthesize information, and less likely less influenced by adults in their environment. Paget's theory of cognitive development also suggested there were 4 stages of development in which all children pass through sequentially and roughly about the same age. These being the sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete, as well as formal operational phases. And in class, watch a little YouTube video on those different areas. Paget, though, also suggested that there could be transitions, which means that some children may move forwards and backwards through each one of those stages, depending upon their age and their experiences in life. But ultimately, by the time they hit, 15 or 16 years, they're certainly within the formal operational aspect of development. Memory and the realization of existence of memory forms part of cognitive development. So cognitive development is your ability to recall and to understand that you have an ability to recall. Some things are easier to remember than others. Learning or memory differs between people, and the ability to recall facts and past events is known as declarative memory. There are a number of strategies that can be employed to improve memory skills. On figure 5.3, page 180. I strongly suggest, guys, that you take a photocopy of that, stick it up on your wall, as I myself have used a variety of those strategies in the classroom to consolidate learning with all my students, regardless of their ability. But I think you yourself would find those strategies valuable whilst completing this course if you're one of the new students that's new to the program. So yeah, guys, page 180, check it out. Vygotsky believed that a child's ability to think was bound by their ability to remember. So Vygotsky is suggesting that thinking and memory go hand in hand. Information processing is one's ability to collect, sort, store, recall, and translate new facts to find meaning. Memory is a complex task that can be triggered by certain inputs. Memories can be detailed or vague. They can be short or long term. Short term meaning working memory. It means it's at the front of your brain where new information is. And if you don't continually collect, sort, store, recall, or translate that working memory, then that memory you'll have will actually be lost. It actually won't become long-term memory. Your brain will actually let it go. And those neurons that you had that understood those concepts will basically be dissolved and not used anymore. So in order for you to learn new skills, we have to practice, 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 and practice. And the more we practice, the more long-term that information becomes. Concept development. Concepts help us to organize information. Basic concepts lead to the development of complex concepts. That is, when existing information is used to develop new knowledge and skills. In the classroom teaching practice, we call this scaffolding. Concept development involves finding relationships between things and understanding interactions such as cause and effect. Concepts can be a shortcut to knowledge and can reduce the emphasis on relying on memory. Please turn to table 5.4 on page 182 to consolidate your understanding of conceptual development. Okay, so Howard Gardner, guys, was an American psychologist who was born in 1943, and I believe he's still alive today. Traditionally, intelligence was based upon IQ. That's your ability to remember information and recall that information on a series of standardized tests. And the more information you could recall, the greater the score that you got was, and therefore the more intelligent you were. However, Howard Gardner had a different theory. He believed that individuals actually had a range of different levels of intelligence, and that the ability to solve problems or to create products that are resulted within one or more cultural setting is a more appropriate way to define intelligence as opposed to IQ. Gardner therefore developed the multiple intelligences theory, which we'll talk about shortly. Gardner demonstrates that intelligence relates to multiple abilities and that each person possesses a combination of these. Okay, guys, so for your review, I've put in a little poster here on different levels of multiple intelligences produced by Howard Gardner. There's also a link down the bottom to an online tool that you can use to actually conduct a survey to develop your own style or your own multiple intelligences or your learning style. Please press pause now and take a flick through each one of those different multiple intelligences. And even have a go at doing that survey yourself and letting me know what your type of preference is. It'd be interesting to discuss in class next week. Cognitive development in middle childhood. Now, let me bring all these little points down so it's easier for us to understand. Okay. Towards middle childhood, children develop more complex thinking skills. This includes moral judgment, logical thought, and the ability to consider abstract concepts. The growth of the frontal lobe here, you'll see an arrow going towards the front of the brain, So in this case, the person's looking towards the left. The little yellow stem bit going down the back is actually the spinal cord. So the pink part is actually the front of the brain that sits just above where the eyes are. Growth of the frontal lobe supports a range of developing cognitive skills. This includes the ability to form order and logic. During this period, connections between the two sides, or the right and left hemisphere, of the brain form. Synapses, if you look at the right-hand side here, we have a nerve. The synapse is actually the space between the nerve, where the nerve passes message on from one nerve to the other nerve. That little gap's called a synapse. Synapses are strengthened, therefore there are more nerves and more connections in the brain when learning takes place. When learning does not place, then those synapses that aren't strengthened, okay, lose their connections and they're trimmed. That basically means that they die off and they don't develop that ability to form long-term neural connections or long-term memory. It suggests that the left side of the brain specializes in logical thought and facts, and the right side specializes in emotions, feelings, and creativity, as well as motor skills. It's also suggested that brain age can be associated with certain abilities as the brain grows and organizes itself. So, if you think about the left side of the brain being more logical and thoughtful and factual, which part of Howard's multiple intelligence do you think would that relate to? If you think about the right side being more emotional, more feeling orientated, more creative, and more motor skilled, what part of Howard's multiple intelligence do you think that would fulfill? Vygotsky believed that language is the most important and most significant milestone in cognitive development. Language is complex and contains many rules. However, native language is learnt in a social context and is developed through exposure and interaction. Native language refers to, guys, how we speak in the home, how we speak in the community, and what ways of speaking are acceptable and what ways aren't acceptable. It means to exchange information as well as to express emotions. Language and speech describe different but closely related areas. The key area of speech includes articulation, orality of voice, and the key areas of language includes whether or not someone is receptive, they understand the information, and expressive, being that they are understood. There are several theories of language development. The acquisition of language is understood from 4 different approaches. These theories are used to explain how language skills are developed. In class, we'll watch a quick YouTube on some of these videos. One of the 4 different approaches to development of language comes from Noam Chomsky, who was a nativist. Chomsky hypothesized that the brain is naturally wired with a special mechanism to learn language. This helps to explain how different languages of different complexities and structures are all learnt by children at approximately the same age. There is no need to understand complicated rules or concepts. Children have an ability to understand and make sense and use of language. Recent research suggests rather than having a born ability to use language, children have an ability to crack the code, so to speak, of language due to heightened skills of interperception. But we'll get into that another day. Okay, Skinner's behavioralist theory suggests that language is learnt through imitation and practiced in a stimulus response process. The child is exposed to language and feels of knowledge. The child then models and reinforces or practices and has those sounds praised or corrected, and that helps them to develop a part of their natural language skills. Paget, we all remember him from last week, had a theory on cognitive development. He believed that cognitive language is a result of interactions within the environment, and that the language depends upon cognition. The ability to communicate is then linked with cognitive development, and the two developing in tandem. Finally, Vygotsky and Brunner, we also discussed those guys last week. They had a theory on interactionalist. They both suggested that language developed as a result of social constructions in which a child learns from interactions with people and the environment, that is, within a social context. Furthermore, it suggests that adults will help build the foundations on which the knowledge can increase. And self-thought, being the thought in your head or the private speech that you have, is also involved in higher levels of thinking. Language builds from simple to complex and builds upon prior knowledge and experience. Phonemes, morphones, lexicons, phrases, and sentences all communicate meaning. We're going to discuss each one of those now. Phonemes are sets of sounds used for language, such as vowel sounds, such as sh, u, and ch. The English language has 44 phonemes. Other language has as few as 10, and others have more than 140. Morphones are the smallest meaning units of language. So a morphone is a sound or a word that only has one particular letter in it, such as I or a. They include prefixes as well. When we add an S to a word, it forms a sense of ownership, such as walks or walked or walking. In plurality, such as books. A lexicon is the vocabulary of a language. Its use will develop with small words, with simple sounds, generally words that describe things, such as mama or dada. So a lexicon is basically a word that is not a genuine word in terms of what you might find in the dictionary, but it's a word that sounds very similar to a word that you might have within the dictionary, that an individual such as toddlers might experiment with in order to help their brains to produce those words and those sounds with further practice. Semantics. Semantics is the ability to understand the meaning of words, including where there may be more than one meaning. This includes words that sound the same but have different meanings, such as a homophone, and words that are spelt the same but have different meanings, such as homonyms. Pragmatics refers to the understanding of how we use words in a socially and culturally acceptable manner. Physical growth and development. Physical development, also known as motor development, is a mastery of self-movement, and it requires the physical development of bones, muscles, nerves, tissues, and most importantly, the development of the brain to control these movements. Genetics, environmental factors can also play a part. Motor development can be separated into three different types: gross, fine, and perceptual. Gross refers to your ability to move the larger muscle groups, such as your arms, your legs, your back, to go for a walk, run, or climb a tree. Fine refers to the smaller, more tactile muscles, such as the finger muscles in your fingers, your toes, and your face. You might use these to write with a pen, to open a book, or to use a screwdriver, to even operate the remote on a remote control. And perceptual refers to your ability to use your senses to create input, such as if you're walking along and suddenly you get pushed in the back by a big gust of wind, are you going to fall on your face? Or is your body going to pick up that there's a big gust of wind coming and your body's going to tense, and your next step forward is going to land with a solid foot plant in order to brace you to prevent that fall from happening? Perceptual motor skills are very important with children, which is why climbing and running and rolling and using their eyes visually and tactily, such as catching a ball and throwing a ball and kicking and swimming, are so important. As the more skills or more perceptual skills that we develop in younger age, the more likely we're going to carry those perceptual motor skills and fine motor skills with us throughout into our adulthood. Perception skills includes the ability to interpret and understand what you see and what you hear. Dominance in hand preference. It's suggested that generally hand preference is determined by the age of 3. There's a relationship observed between hand preference as well as the brain hemispheres, with a right-handed preference generally indicated a left brain dominance and vice versa. Therefore, a right-handed handedness tends to dominate most population. So for your interest, I'll put together a further slide here. So here we have the right and left sides of the brain. The right side is obviously big, bright, and colourful. That's where your emotion intelligence is, your imagination, expression, your art awareness, intuition, and your creativity. Your left side of the brain is more tactical or analytical. The left side of the brain likes numbers, language, reasoning, logic, science, and maths. However, in terms of right-handed, left-handed, somebody who is more left-brain thinking, that is more mathematic, more reasoning, they're more likely to be right-handed. Someone who is more right-brained, meaning they have high levels of expression, they have high levels of emotional intelligence, have higher intuition and creativity, are more likely to be left-handed. Um, so if you think about each one of those different areas, as well as uh, Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, you can see that measuring IQ and working out what the best ways are to teach children is no longer simple rote memory practice and memory drills like what it used to be. There's a range of strategies here that we can use to engage different children based upon, generally speaking, if they're right-handed or left-handed, if they're male or female, if they're linguistic or if they're emotional, if they're maths based or if they're arty, to bring out the most potential in them. Please understand, however, a little disclaimer down the bottom, that being left or right-handed does not exclude the other hemisphere from activity. What it simply means is that one part of the brain is more dominant than the other, and therefore a child will have preferences towards their learning strategies or the types of activities they like to be engaged in. Further physical development in middle adulthood. During middle adulthood, there are many physical challenges and refinements of existing motor skills. It's the stage during which some children may appear awkward as they come to terms with physical changes. There may be some skills that are developed or mastered before others, such as a preference for ball games over tasks like painting, which now require fine motor skills. There are also gender differences that are discussed before. These often become evident in later childhood, and research suggests that gender differences really become quite common around the ages of 9 or 10 years old, with girls often growing and becoming more mature than boys. This includes beginning of sexual maturity as well, which can also lead to results of girls becoming more self-conscious about their bodies and more aware of their own body image. It's also suggested that girls experience a growth spurt between 10 and 12 years of age, where boys are more likely to experience it between 13 and 14 years of age. Adolescence in the in the early teenage years, is associated with changes in physical appearance as a result of maturation. Adolescents may experience pimples, growth spurts, and a sense of awkwardness. They are more aware of body image and a raised sense of sexuality and sexual experimentation. Puberty is a biological change that occurs during sexual maturity. Girls tend to reach puberty before boys. During this period, hormone changes are responsible for the developmental changes and can result in mood changes and teenage angst, as well as an elevated sense of self-consciousness. Sexual orientation is a major development marker of adolescence. Through sexual fantasies, attraction, behaviors, interactions, a self-identification of sexuality occurs. For those who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered, this can also become a confusing time full of anxiety. There may be difficulties amongst family, peers, and the community. There can also be social or religious values and beliefs that become a major source of stress. There also may be fear of rejection from family and a greater risk of bullying and harassment. Physical attractiveness and positive body image are shown to lead to higher levels of self-esteem and personality attributes associated with social success. Those who have poor self-image may have lower self-confidence, which can develop into eating disorders and/or depression. Okay, guys, that completes our theory for week 2. What I'd like to do now is take a moment to flick through each one of these points. There are several questions from chapter 4 as well as a couple from chapter 5 that will be in your student assessments for this week. But I thought that by putting them up on the board, we can actually work as a team and discuss some of these questions and share some of these answers in class before actually getting on with your assessment booklets. So please press pause, take a moment to read through each one of these questions, flip through chapter 4 as well as chapter 5 in your textbooks. And do your absolute best to have these questions and the other questions completed from your assessment activity section this week in class, and we'll discuss them more in depth next week. Now remember, if you have questions with any of your assessments, please give me a ring or email me during the times we discussed. Those times are 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock on a Monday, Wednesday from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, as well as Friday from 9 o'clock to 10:30. If you call me during those times, guys, you'll absolutely get me. Or if you email me, they'll be the times that I'll be able to get back to you. Please don't wait until last minute to start answering these questions. Please start working on them now. Have an awesome week, everyone, and I'll catch you tomorrow in class. Take care. Bye.